Our retirement party was on a Saturday in October, and my son stood up in front of 74 people and told them I had dementia. He did it calmly. He did it with a glass of wine in his hand and a look on his face that I can only describe as rehearsed grief, the kind of expression a man practices in a mirror before he needs to use it in public. He talked about how hard the last year had been. He talked about changes he'd noticed. He talked about concerns the family had discussed privately. He said the word decline twice. He said the phrase cognitive difficulty once, carefully, like a man placing a fragile object on a shelf. He didn't look at me while he said any of it. I was sitting 12 feet away at the head of the table. What happened next, I could not have planned if I'd tried. And what happened in the 4 months after that is the reason I'm telling this story now. My name is Harold Bauer. I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer for a civil engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio. I designed bridges, not famous ones, not the kind you'd find on a postcard. County bridges, municipal overpasses, the kind of infrastructure that people drive across every day without thinking about it, which is exactly how you know it was done right. If a bridge holds and nobody notices, that's the compliment. I retired in October after 34 years with the same firm. My pension is solid. I own my house outright. I have $340,000 in a retirement account I have been adding to since I was 31 years old, every 2 weeks, without fail, even in the years when the market made me want to close the app and go sit in a dark room. I have an IRA, a modest brokerage account, and a certificate of deposit I roll over annually at a credit union I have banked at since 1989. I tell you all of this not to brag. I tell you this so you understand who I am before I tell you what my son tried to do to me. Because what he tried to do only makes sense if you understand that there was something to take. My wife Ruth died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is how that particular cancer tends to work. Ruth was 62 years old. She taught high school chemistry for 27 years, graded papers on Sunday evenings, and always had a red pen behind her ear and laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She was the funniest person I have ever known. She was also the most organized. When she died, she left behind color-coded binders for every aspect of our financial life, labeled in her handwriting, filed in a cabinet in the study. She had updated them 6 weeks before the diagnosis, when she went in for what we both thought was a routine checkup. I do not know if she knew. She never told me if she did. But those binders suggest she had some sense that order was about to become important. After Ruth died, I kept the binders. I kept adding to them. I kept balancing the accounts the way she taught me, which was the way her father had taught her, which was the way people who grew up with nothing learn to treat money when they finally have some. With respect. With both hands. My son's name is Curtis. He is 38 years old. He works, or worked until recently, in wealth management at a financial advisory firm in Cincinnati. He has a wife named Pamela, 2 children I love very much, and a lifestyle that has always run slightly ahead of what I understood his income to be. Nice house in a nice neighborhood, 2 cars that were newer than necessary, vacations that appeared on social media with a frequency that told you they were partly about being seen. I noticed these things the way you notice things about your children when you love them and do not say anything, because loving them and saying something are 2 different calculations. Curtis and I have always been close in the way fathers and sons are close when they are similar enough to understand each other, but different enough that the understanding has limits. He is sharper with money than I ever was, or so I thought. He can read a room. He remembers names, makes people feel considered, has the salesman's gift of making you feel like the conversation was your idea. I used to think this was just charm. I did not understand for a long time that charm and character are not the same thing, and that a man can have the first one completely in the absence of the second. I have a daughter as well. Her name is Karen. She is 41, lives in Pittsburgh, works in hospital administration, has been married to a good man named Phil for 15 years. Karen is quieter than Curtis. She does not fill a room the way he does. She checks in on me every Sunday without fail, the same time every week, 7 p.m. And our conversations run about 25 minutes on average. She asks how I am eating. She asks about the neighbors. She asked for 2 years after Ruth died whether I had thought about a grief counselor. Not pushing, just asking. And when I finally said yes, she found me one within the week. Karen was not invited to the retirement party. I want to say that plainly because it matters. My retirement party, organized by Curtis, held at a venue he had booked and paid the deposit on, with a guest list he had assembled, did not include my daughter. I did not know this until the week before when Karen called on her Sunday and mentioned, in passing, that she was sorry she wouldn't be able to make the drive from Pittsburgh that weekend. I said, "Karen, what do you mean? The party is Saturday." She said, "Curtis told me it was a small thing, just colleagues." I said, "It is not a small thing. There are 74 people coming. He booked a private room at a restaurant." A silence. The kind Karen has when she is deciding how much to say. She said, "I will try to rearrange things." She did not make it in time. She was in the car, she told me later, when she got a text from a number she did not recognize. A summary of what her brother had said at the party, sent by a woman named Diane, who had been a friend of Ruth's and mine for 20 years, and who had been sitting 3 tables away from me when Curtis stood up with his wine glass. I want to tell you about the party. It was a Saturday, October, the kind of fall day in Ohio where the light is amber and low, and everything looks like it is being photographed. The restaurant was a place in Dublin called Hartley's, a private events room in the back with round tables and decent food, and the kind of hired staff that refills your water without being asked. There were people from the firm, neighbors, a few old friends, Ruth's sister Margaret, who drove down from Cleveland, and brought a card signed by the whole family. 74 people who had come to say that 34 years meant something. I was having a good time. I want to say that. I had given a short speech before dinner that I had written on index cards and delivered from memory, about bridges, about the things you build that hold weight for decades after you stop thinking about them, about what it means to spend a career making something that quietly works. People laughed at the parts I intended and clapped at the end, and I sat down feeling the specific satisfaction of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. Then Curtis stood up. He tapped his glass. He thanked everyone for coming. He said a few things about me that were true and that I appreciated. He talked about my career. He talked about my integrity. He used the word dedicated and the word thorough, and he was not wrong about either. Then he paused. Not a natural pause, a prepared one. He said, I want to be honest tonight, because Dad has always valued honesty, and I think he would want me to be honest with the people who love him. I looked at him from 12 feet away. I did not know yet what was coming, but I noticed the pause, and I noticed the word honest, and something in my chest went still. He said that the last year had been hard, that he had noticed things, that the family had had some difficult conversations. He talked about moments of confusion. He talked about concerns about daily management. He said, with the word gently placed before it like a pillow, that there were cognitive changes that the family was taking seriously. He said he was bringing this up in front of this group, our people, because he wanted everyone to know that he was stepping in to help, that he had been in conversations with a lawyer about some protective arrangements, that he wanted the people who loved his father to know that Dad was going to be taken care of. He raised his glass, he said, to Harold, the man who built things that last. 74 people raised their glasses. Some of them were looking at me with that particular expression, the one that is equal parts sympathy and discomfort, the expression people wear when they are processing unexpected information in public and do not know yet what to do with it. I sat at the head of the table, and I did not move. I want to tell you what it feels like to sit at your own retirement party while your son tells 74 people you are losing your mind. It feels like the floor has moved. Not dramatically, not like an earthquake. Like a slow, quiet shift. The kind you only notice because suddenly nothing is exactly where you expected it to be. I have stood on bridges during structural tests. I know what it is to feel something solid prove uncertain. It felt like that. I was still feeling it when the man 3 tables back stood up. His name is Dr. Raymond Osei. He is 58 years old. He has been my primary care physician for 11 years. He was at the party because he and I played chess at the same senior center on Thursday afternoons, a thing that began 2 years ago when we were both there for different reasons and ended up at the same table, and which has continued every week since then, except when one of us travels. He was at the party because I had invited him myself 3 weeks earlier, and he had said, "Harold, I would be honored." He is not a dramatic man. He is methodical and quiet and precise in the way that the best doctors are, meaning he listens more than he talks, and he says what he means without decoration. He had been sitting 3 tables back with his wife Grace when Curtis stood up and said what he said. He stood up before the applause had finished. He said, "I am sorry to interrupt." The room went quiet, not all at once. In a wave, table by table, the way quiet travels through a room when someone says something that changes the temperature. He said, "My name is Raymond Osei. I am Harold Bauer's physician. I have been his physician for 11 years. I see him regularly. We have complete blood work and cognitive assessments on file through this calendar year. And I want to say clearly to everyone in this room that Harold Bauer is one of the sharpest men I have ever had as a patient." He paused. He said, "I do not know what the family has been discussing privately. That is not my business. But what was just described to this room does not match the man I examine, test, and sit across from every week. He is not experiencing cognitive decline. He does not have dementia. He is, by every clinical and personal measure I am qualified to make, sharper than most people in this room. He looked at Curtis. He said, "I thought that should be said." Then he sat down. I have replayed that moment many times in the 4 months since. The way the room held its breath, the way Curtis's face went through its changes, the color leaving first, then the expression, then the control he had been holding the entire evening, all of it draining at once like water from a tub. He looked at me. I looked at him. He said, "Uncle Ray, Dr. Osei, I think you misunderstood what I was saying." Raymond said from his seat, without standing again, "I do not think I did." Someone coughed. Someone else pushed back a chair. Margaret, Ruth's sister, who had driven from Cleveland and signed the family card and was sitting 2 seats from me, put her hand over mine on the table. She said nothing. She just put her hand over mine. I stood up. I said, "I think we should let people enjoy their dinner." I said it quietly. I said it the way I say things when I am very certain and do not need volume to make the certainty clear. I learned that from 34 years of project meetings, from telling contractors that a load calculation was wrong, from telling clients that what they wanted and what was structurally sound were 2 different things. You do not need to raise your voice when you are right and you know it and you can prove it. Curtis sat down. The party continued. The food came. People talked. Some people came to find me during the dessert course and said things that were kind and careful. Raymond and Grace came over, and he shook my hand and said, "I apologize if that was not my place." I said, "Raymond, it was exactly your place." His wife Grace hugged me without saying anything, which was the right call. I drove home that night and sat in the kitchen for a long time without turning on more than the one light over the stove. Ruth's binders were in the study. The house was exactly the way it always is. Nothing had moved. The mail was on the counter where I put it. The coffee maker was set for morning. Everything was where I had left it, and nothing about this room suggested a man who was losing his grip on his own life. I thought about the party. I thought about 74 people. I thought about the word decline and the word cognitive, and the phrase protective arrangements and a lawyer. I thought about my retirement account and my pension and the house and the binders. Then I picked up my phone and I called Karen. It was 11:40 at night. She answered on the second ring. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, how long has this been going on?" I said, "I do not know. I did not know it was going on." She said, "I am driving down tomorrow morning." I said, "Karen, it is a 5-hour drive." She said, "I will be there by noon." She was there by 11:15. We sat at the kitchen table for most of that Sunday. Karen had a notepad. She asked me questions the way she asks questions in her professional life, methodically, without letting her expression tell me what she thought before she had the information she needed. She asked about the lawyer Curtis had mentioned. She asked if anyone had contacted me about any documents. She asked whether Curtis had power of attorney over anything. He did not. Ruth and I had done our estate planning together in 2014 with an attorney named David Foss here in Columbus. We had wills, we had healthcare directives, we had a durable power of attorney that named each other, and, after Ruth died, that I had updated to name Karen. I had done this update 14 months ago on David Foss's recommendation, when I came in for an annual review of the documents. I had not told Curtis about the update. Karen's face when I told her that. She said, "Does Curtis think he has power of attorney?" I said, "I do not know what Curtis thinks." She said, "We need to find out." She called David Foss's office Monday morning and left a message. He called back by noon. She explained the situation. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he would like to meet with me in person, and he would like to bring in a colleague who specialized in elder financial law, a woman named Patricia Wren. And could we come in Thursday?
We went Thursday. David and Patricia Wren sat across from us in a conference room, and we went through everything. The documents were in order. The update was on file. Curtis had no legal authority over anything I owned. Patricia Wren said, "Mr. Bauer, I want to ask you something directly. Has your son asked you to sign anything in the last year?" I thought about it. He had. Last December, he had sent me a document by email that he described as a financial planning form his firm used to help aging clients consolidate their accounts for easier management. He had explained it over the phone as a formality. He said it would let him keep an eye on things and make sure everything was organized properly. He said it was something many of his clients did when they reached retirement age. I had not signed it. I had meant to follow up and had gotten busy with the transition out of the firm and had forgotten. I told Patricia Wren this. She asked me to forward her the email. I did, from my phone, right there in her office. She read it. She read it twice. Then she looked up at me and she said, "Mr. Bauer, this is not a financial planning form. This is a limited power of attorney. If you had signed this, your son would have had legal authority to manage and transfer assets from 3 of your accounts." I sat with that for a moment. David Foss said, very quietly, the same thing Mrs. Pemberley said to Owen Hartwich in that dark hospice hallway. He said, "You are lucky you did not sign it." I said, "I know." I drove home that Thursday and I sat at the kitchen table again, and I thought about December. I thought about the email I had opened and read and set aside and forgotten. I am not a man who forgets things easily. I have not been forgetting things. But I had been busy and the email had looked like paperwork, and I had put it in the folder where I put things I intend to return to. I thought about what Patricia Wren had said. Limited power of attorney. Manage and transfer assets. I thought about Curtis standing up at a party with a glass of wine in his hand and telling 74 people that his father was declining. I thought about the lawyer he had mentioned, the protective arrangements. I thought about the word decline, and the fact that my doctor, who sees me every month, who runs full panels, who sits across from me every Thursday over a chessboard for 2 hours, had stood up in a room of 74 people and said I was sharper than any of them. Karen stayed through the weekend. On Saturday morning, she sat across from me with her own coffee and said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it all the way through before you respond." I said, "Okay." She said she had been aware for about 8 months that something was wrong with Curtis, not with his health, with his finances. She had heard things secondhand from Pamela, his wife, and from one of Pamela's cousins, who was also Karen's college friend. She said Curtis had had a significant loss in a private investment fund. She said she had heard the number $160,000, though she was not certain. She said she had been deciding for months whether to tell me,
and had not told me because she did not want to worry me in the year I was retiring, and because she had hoped Curtis would handle it himself. She said, "I should have told you. I am sorry I did not tell you." I looked at my daughter. I thought about the Sunday calls, the 25 minutes every week without fail. I thought about the grief counselor she found within a week of me saying yes. I thought about her driving 5 hours on a Sunday morning without hesitation. I said, "Karen, you are here now." She said, "Yes." I said, "That is enough." She cried a little, not a lot. She is not a person who cries easily, which she got from Ruth. She pressed her fingertips against her eyes and breathed twice, and then she was done, and she picked up her coffee.
I will skip ahead slightly because what came next was slow and procedural, and the details of it are not as important as the shape of it. Patricia Wren referred me to a colleague who handled cases with potential criminal dimensions. His name was Alan Marsh, and he was the kind of attorney who made you feel calm, not because he minimized anything, but because he understood it completely and communicated that understanding without drama. He had been practicing elder financial law in Ohio for 26 years. He had seen this before. Not this exactly, but close enough. He said the email document was significant. He said the retirement party speech, witnessed by 74 people, including a physician who could testify to my cognitive health, was also significant, specifically in the context of Curtis's employment. Because what Curtis did at that party, in front of witnesses, in front of my doctor, was make a fraudulent claim about my mental competence in the apparent service of gaining financial control over my assets. Alan said, "The party speech is the mistake he will have difficulty explaining." He was right. Curtis worked at a wealth management firm, a firm that operated under fiduciary law, that required its advisors to maintain certain ethical and legal standards, not only in their professional conduct, but in matters that touched their professional reputation. What Curtis had done at the party had been witnessed and, as it turned out, partially recorded. Two of my former colleagues from the engineering firm had had their phones on the table. The recordings were not cinematic. They were shaky and the audio was uneven. But they captured Curtis's speech, and they captured Raymond Osei standing up and what Raymond said. Those recordings were shared with me by my colleagues within a week of the party. I gave them to Alan Marsh. Alan gave them to the appropriate people. I am going to be precise here about what happened and what did not happen, because I think precision matters. Curtis was not charged with a crime over the party speech. Alan told me that would be difficult to establish, and that the legal system moves slowly, and that we should focus our attention on what could be proven clearly. What could be proven clearly was the email document from December, which was a legal instrument misrepresented as an administrative form. Alan filed a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Financial Abuse Unit in November. The firm where Curtis worked conducted its own internal review. I do not know all the details of what they found in that review. What I know is that Curtis resigned in January, which is a word that in these contexts often means something adjacent to what it literally says. His LinkedIn profile, which Karen checked periodically, was updated in February. The firm's name was gone. The title was gone. There was nothing new to replace it. His marriage, I heard from Margaret, who heard from Pamela's sister, is under significant strain. I will not go further into that because it involves people who do not deserve to have their private difficulties discussed publicly, particularly his children, my grandchildren, who have done nothing and are not responsible for their father's choices.
I think about his children more than I think about him. Here is what I need to tell you, and this is the part I have been working up to. After Alan filed the complaint, and after Curtis resigned from the firm, I called Raymond Osei. Not to update him, though I did that. I called him because there was something I had not said, and I needed to say it. I said, "Raymond, I want to ask you something. What made you stand up?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Harold, I have been practicing medicine for 28 years. In those 28 years, I have watched what happens to elderly patients when the people around them decide, for whatever reason, that the patient can no longer speak for themselves. I have watched it happen in hospitals. I have watched it happen in care facilities. I have watched it happen in very ordinary ways in very ordinary families. Quietly, over time, the way these things tend to happen." He paused. He said, "You have been my patient for 11 years. You are one of the most cognitively intact people I have examined at your age. And I was sitting in that room listening to your son describe a man I have never examined. A man who does not exist." He said, "Harold, someone had to say something. It happened to be me. But someone was always going to say something. That is all." I sat with that for a while. Then I said, "Raymond, when we play chess on Thursday, do you let me win?" He laughed. He said, "Harold, I have not won a game since March. I am deeply embarrassed about it." I said, "I know. I have been counting." He laughed again. We got off the phone. I want to talk about something for a moment before I close this out, because it is the thing I have turned over most in the 4 months since October, and I think it is the thing that is actually worth saying. I am 67 years old. I am healthy. I am sharp. I have a pension and paid-off property and binders my late wife color-coded, and everything in order, and a doctor who plays chess with me, and a daughter who drives 5 hours without being asked. By every external measure, I was the least vulnerable person in that room on that Saturday in October, and it almost worked. Not because I was declining, not because I was confused, because I trusted my son, because I had a document I meant to return to sitting in a folder in my email, because I had not told him about the update to the power of attorney, because I had not wanted to think about what I was noticing about his finances and his lifestyle, the same way I had not wanted to think about it for years, because thinking about it would have required me to look clearly at someone I loved and see what was actually there. The people who do this, and I want you to hear me carefully on this, the people who do this do not pick confused elderly strangers. They pick the people who trust them. They pick the people who would never imagine it. They pick the people who will make excuses for them, right up until the moment when excuses are no longer available. Curtis was not a monster who appeared without warning. He was a son I raised who made choices over many years that I did not examine because examining them felt disloyal. He was a man in financial trouble who looked at his aging father's assets and made a calculation. The calculation was wrong, legally and morally, but it was not random. It was built from a very specific understanding of how much I trusted him and how unlikely I would be to question him. He understood me well enough to almost use me. That is the hardest sentence I have said out loud since October. He understood me well enough to almost use me. I do not know if he is the same boy I raised, or if he became something else over time, or if the something else was always there and I chose not to see it. I have spent some time with a grief counselor about this, the same one Karen recommended 2 years ago. She says this is not a question that resolves cleanly. She says I may have to live with the ambiguity of it. I told her I design bridges. I said I am not accustomed to ambiguity in structural questions. She said families are not bridges. I told her that was a fair point. I have not spoken to Curtis since October. He has not called. He sent one text in November that said he was sorry for how things looked at the party and that things were complicated. I read it once, and I have not responded. My grandchildren sent me a drawing at Christmas. The older one is 8. She drew the 2 of us at a table. She drew what I think is supposed to be a chessboard, though it has too many squares and some of them are pink.
I have it on the refrigerator, next to the drawings Karen's kids have sent over the years. It will stay there. The drawing is not about Curtis. The drawing is about an 8-year-old who loves her grandfather and drew him at a table and sent it in the mail. Children are not their parents. I know this. I will not forget this. Margaret calls me once a week now. She started after the party and has not stopped. She is very like Ruth in certain ways. The directness, the refusal to let things go unsaid. She drove 4 hours to be at a retirement party and stayed through the thing that happened and put her hand over mine without saying anything. She is 70 years old and she lives alone, and she makes the best bean soup I have ever eaten. And last month she drove down and we went to the Columbus Museum of Art and ate lunch at a place near campus, and it was a very good afternoon. Karen calls every Sunday, 7 o'clock, 25 minutes on average. Raymond Osei and I play chess every Thursday. I am currently ahead in our running total by 11 games, which I mention with appropriate humility. He says he is studying. I told him to study harder. Here is what I want to say to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening. Check your documents. I do not mean look at them vaguely. I mean know exactly what they say and who has authority over what. Know who your power of attorney names. Know when you last reviewed it. Take it to your attorney this year if you have not looked at it in more than 2 years. The cost of that appointment is the cost of an afternoon. The cost of not going is something else entirely. If someone sends you a form to sign and calls it a formality, read it before you sign it. Read it all the way through. If you cannot read all the way through it, ask someone who can, and make sure that person has nothing to gain from what the form contains. The people who love you will wait while you read a document. The people who are trying to use you will not. If someone in your family is asking questions about your assets that feel slightly off, that feel just a few degrees from where they should be, trust that feeling. I spent years not trusting that feeling about my son's finances and his choices. I watched things that did not quite add up and told myself it was none of my business, and then found out that my business was precisely what was at stake. And if you ever see something happening to someone else, in a restaurant, at a party, in a family not your own, and you have information that matters, say something. Be Raymond Osei. Stand up in a room of 74 people and say the true thing, because you are the only one in that room
who can say it from where you are standing. The cost of being wrong is a little awkwardness. The cost of saying nothing and being right is somebody's whole life. Esther Pemberley said something to Owen Hartwich in a dark hospice hallway because she had a son named Tomlin, and she had spent 15 years in places she never imagined she would end up. And she decided that if she ever saw it happening to someone else, she would say something. Raymond Osei stood up in a room of 74 people at a retirement party in Columbus, Ohio, and said the true thing, because after 28 years of watching it happen, he was not going to sit at a table and watch it happen again. One person, one moment, one true sentence. I want to tell you one more thing before I close, because I think it is the most honest thing I can say, and I've been turning it over for months, looking for the right words. When I sat at the kitchen table that Sunday night after the party, in the one light over the stove, I was not thinking about the retirement account or the pension or the house. I was thinking about my son. I was thinking about a boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat of the car on the way home from his grandmother's house, and who I would carry inside without waking him.
I was thinking about a 12-year-old who cried when his dog died and would not admit he was crying, and I sat on the floor of his room and did not make a thing of it. I was thinking about a man at a table in a restaurant with his hands laid flat, calm, practical, explaining to me why he needed to be in charge of my life. I kept trying to make those three people into the same person, and the math would not work. I think that is the thing about betrayal by someone you love. It is not that you failed to see it coming. It is that you had evidence of who they were before, real evidence, years of it. And the earlier version of the person is so vivid and so certain that it makes the later version hard to believe, even when it is standing right in front of you with its hands flat on a table and a notary one phone call away. I loved my son for 38 years. I do not know if I stopped loving him now. I do not think love works that way, not the parental kind. I think you can love someone and understand clearly that you cannot trust them, and that those two things can sit inside you at the same time without resolving. My grief counselor confirmed this. I told her I was not sure it was a healthy thing to carry. She said it was simply the true thing, and that true things are worth carrying even when they are heavy. I carry it. I do not know where I would be tonight without that sentence. I know where I would be. I would be signing documents I did not understand, while someone I trusted told me it was a formality. I would be the man I was warned against becoming in the email I did not sign. I balanced my accounts every Sunday after Ruth taught me how. I read the fine print. I thought that was enough. It was not enough without someone willing to stand up and say the thing nobody else in the room was going to say. I am 67 years old. I have built bridges. I know that what holds weight is not one bolt, not one beam. It is the system. It is everything working together in the right order. The documents, the attorney, the doctor, who is also your friend, the daughter who drives 5 hours without being asked, the sister-in-law who puts her hand over yours without a word. The system held on a Saturday in October in a private dining room in Dublin, Ohio, and I am still standing on it. Check your documents. Call the people who tell you the truth. And if someone in a room stands up to say the thing nobody else is saying, let them finish. Thank you for staying with me tonight. Take care of yourselves out there.
and read the fine print. Always read the fine print.